Hello and welcome to It's Your Business with Mario Toneguzzi on Megapix Media. Joining me today is Mark Milke, who is Executive Director of Research for the Canadian Energy Centre. Thanks for joining us today, Mark.
Thanks for having me, Mario.
Let's talk about a new research that was put out, a fact sheet that was put out by the Centre here just yesterday, I believe. And it talks about the impact of the oil and gas sector and of Alberta on Ontario and its economy. Can we start, Mark, by just looking at some of the numbers of the worth of goods and services that are imported from Alberta, from Ontario, because of the province of Alberta, I guess.
Right. So there's two measurements in the fact sheet. One is about the oil and gas sector's impact on the Ontario economy. So for example, there are 68,000 jobs, direct and indirect, in Ontario as a result of oil and gas spending on goods and services in Ontario. The majority of those are indirect, but all matter. You take away the oil and gas spending, you don't have 68,000 jobs, in other words, according to data we parse through from Statistics Canada. Then step back for a moment and ask yourself, all right, what impact does Alberta as a province have on Ontario's economy? In other words, the goods and services sold out of Ontario to Alberta. And here the numbers get really interesting and frankly, really big. I mean, over a 5-year period, Alberta mattered to Ontario's, you could say, interprovincial export economy to the tune of $161 billion. And to put that in some context, on an annual basis in one of the most recent years, that puts us second in place behind Quebec among the provinces as a province that's important to Ontario's economy. And that's important to know because Alberta's population, of course, is much smaller than Quebec. It's about 11% of the national population, whereas what Alberta buys, consumers, businesses, governments in Alberta from Ontario, amounts to about 22% of the manufacturing sector in Ontario and about 24% of the overall interprovincial trade from Ontario. In other words, Alberta is twice as important to Ontario's exports to provinces than its population would suggest it would be.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit more about the jobs and the impact, and the wages as well? Not only sheer numbers of jobs, but wages that are impacted by this.
Sure. Well, on the jobs, so there are 68,000 direct and indirect jobs as a result just of oil and gas spending. So, cut out again the Alberta effect, but just oil and gas spending in Ontario. The direct jobs would be, for example, some Alberta firm hires, an engineer from Ontario, pays her salary. That's an example of a direct job. An indirect impact would be a firm that buys, say, trucks from, an Ontario manufacturer, an Ontario automotive company. And the spin-off effect from the manufacturing of trucks or other automobiles or steel in Ontario, that worker goes to, the local cafe or something, or buys furniture in Ontario and creates a job that way, right? Or a number of people that buy furniture because they're employed by a manufacturer in Ontario, which sells to an oil and gas firm. So there are direct and indirect impacts. And what we can tell from the data from Statistics Canada is that in the most recent year, and given how long this data takes to compile, the most recent year was 2016, a down year actually for oil and gas. In 2016, you had $2.1 billion in wages paid to Ontario workers as a result of oil and gas sector spending in the province of Ontario.
Okay. What about in terms of the overall GDP in Ontario and Alberta's contribution to that?
Sure. I'm always going to refer to my notes, but GDP impact is about $7 billion. So again, to put that into some context, they're buying, for example, about $3.5 billion. The oil and gas sector is from Ontario manufacturers. So half of the GDP there, half of the number you just heard, would have a dramatic impact on some manufacturers in Ontario without the oil and gas sector. But the total amount of GDP is about 7 billion, 7.3 billion.
Yeah. And one last thing, Mark, just overall, why is it important that people know these facts, and who should know these facts, I guess?
Yeah. Well, as Tip O'Neill, the former, late Speaker of the House of Representatives in the United States, once said, all politics is local. Economies are like that as well. Economies are local, but it's a mistake to think that only what we see around us is the only economy that exists. In other words, if you're sitting in Ontario, you look around and you see finance, in downtown Toronto, you see
Yeah.
an automotive factory in southern Ontario, you see a steel manufacturer. It's a mistake to think your economy is in one sense isolated. It is, of course, not. Trade is all about trade between provinces, regions, countries, of course, cities. So it's important to understand that a chunk of Ontario's economy and some well-paying jobs in manufacturing, for example, result from oil and gas spending in that province, and more broadly, the health of Alberta's economy that allows for almost a quarter of Ontario's exports to other provinces to be consumed, to be bought by Alberta consumers, businesses, and governments.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot for joining us today, Mark.
Thank you, Mario.
Okay, that was Mark Milke, who is a Executive Director of Research for the Canadian Energy Centre, based here in Calgary. This has been It's Your Business with Mario Toneguzzi on Megapix Media. Thanks for joining us today.